So yesterday I recorded a video based on the Genesis genealogies and trying to make the math work with kind of an experimental vibe. It's kind of interesting because, the more that I look at the Genesis genealogies and the number of years that they lived, it just becomes more and more intriguing. Um, on the one hand, we have science that states there's no way that humans could have ever lived that long. And we have anthropology, the science of anthropology that states um, that, modern humans showed up 300,000 years ago. So it's kind of like, you have to find some kind of an in between where, you're a believer and you believe that Genesis was written and that that it was written by God and that it's, a very powerful text. But at some point, you have to start to calibrate and come to a conclusion about uh, what you think the facts are. And that's why taking a scholarly approach is very important because you're very studious. It's important to be studious on one side with science and studious on the other side with the text. And so, what I've tried to do is try to do some kind of a justification in my mind as to what the facts are. And so I'm going to talk about this for a little bit. So this is part two of what I recorded yesterday. um, so let me start with something very simple. However old you think Genesis is, 4,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, even 12,000 years ago, there's no evidence that modern humans have ever lived for centuries. And I don't mean not recently, I mean ever. Anatomically, modern Homo sapiens appear in the fossil record around 300,000 years ago. And across that entire span, hundreds of thousands of years, we see no biological, genetic, skeletal, or demographic evidence that humans naturally lived 300, 500, or 900 years. Now, why do I say biological, genetic, skeletal, and demographic? Because those are all sciences, and they converge and they integrate. And so when you're looking to see whether something is factual or not, whether you are looking to see whether something is a literary work that is, very important, a theological literary work that is very important, whether it's an absolute scientific treatise or, some kind of, uh, anthropological work. That's not what Genesis is. And so you have all of this science that converges um, unsurmountingly. It's like a dog pile of evidence. So if an interpretation of Genesis requires near millennial human lifespans, the problem is not the date. The problem is the interpretation. So I want to show you a way to read the patriarchal ages in Genesis that uses the earliest complete text we have, respects ancient historiography, stays within biological reality, and does not turn Genesis into myth, because it's not a myth. This is about defending literalism. It's not about defending literalism. It's about reading the numbers the way ancient texts actually used numbers. So which Genesis are we reading? When people talk about the ages of the patriarchs, they usually don't ask a basic question: which Genesis? Most modern Bibles are based on the Masoretic text, standardized by medieval Jewish scribes around 700 to 900 AD. That text is extraordinarily careful, but it is not the earliest witness. The earliest complete genealogies we have come from the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures between produced around 250 BC in Alexandria, Egypt, by 72 Hebrew scribes. That's more than 1,000 years earlier than the Masoretic text tradition. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which are even older, are fragmentary. They don't give us full genealogies, but they prove that multiple numerical traditions existed long before the medieval period. So for this entire discussion, I'm going to do something very disciplined. I'm only going to use the Septuagint. no harmonizing, no mixing texts, and no conspiracy theories. Just what happens if we let the earliest complete text speak for itself. The biological hard stop. Excuse me. Before we touch a single biblical number, we need to draw a line. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed for about 300,000 years. Across that entire span, we have skeletons, we have genetics, we have demographic modeling, we have comparative primate biology, and none of it supports natural human lifespans of hundreds of years. Average lifespan has changed. Maximum lifespan has not. No oxygen canopy, no lost DNA, no forgotten physiology. So whatever Genesis is doing, it is not recording 900-year biological lives in solar years. That doesn't mean the text is wrong. It means that we are probably asking it the wrong question. The flood as a boundary. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming Genesis uses numbers the same way everywhere. It doesn't. The flood is not just a story event, it's a structural boundary. Before the flood, genealogies are sparse, narrative detail is minimal, time is repetitive and formulaic. After the flood, population explodes, geography matters, nations emerge, and history accelerates. Ancient texts regularly change how numbers function across major narrative boundaries. Genesis does too, and once you see that, the ages stop being mysterious. Pre-flood ages, lunar reckoning. So let's start before the flood in Genesis 5 using the Septuagint. The LXX gives us ages like Adam 930, Seth 912, Methuselah 969. Everyone focuses on how big those numbers are. But let's ask the question that no one asks. What if they're not solar years? If we treat the pre-flood ages in the Septuagint as lunar months, something remarkable happens. Divide them by 12. Suddenly, total lifespans cluster around 75 to 81 years. Not wildly different, not random, and tightly grouped. That's exactly what you'd expect from structured numeracy, not myth. Now let's do the uncomfortable part. If we apply lunar reckoning consistently, we also divide the age at begetting by 12. When we do that, most pre-flood begetting ages fall between 13 and 19 years, with Noah as a clear outlier around 41. Now let me be very clear. I'm not saying this was normal, this was ideal, this was what Genesis is promoting. What I'm saying is this. From a biological standpoint, early male fertility is possible. It is rare, it is culturally variable, but it is orders of magnitude more plausible than humans living 900 solar years. That's the comparison. You don't have to like it. You just have to admit which is more plausible. And remember, in ancient genealogies, begat often means lineage succession, not first biological child on your birthday. So why this works pre-flood? This lunar model works only pre-flood, and that matters. Before the flood, no civil calendar is referenced. Time is sacred, not administrative. Genealogy is a story. Using lunar cycles as time units in primordial history is not strange. Using solar years the way we do today is. That isn't special pleading, it's letting the genre set the rules. Post-flood ages, a different function. Now let's cross the flood. In Genesis 11, something changes. The ages of begetting suddenly fall into a realistic adult range. 70, 79, 100, 130. If we try to keep lunar reckoning here, everything collapses. So we don't. Instead, the Septuagint itself suggests a new function. Here's the post-flood table, LXX only. Shem begets at 100, lives 500 more. Arpachshad, 135, then 400. Eber, 134, then 370. Peleg, 130, then 209. Nahor, 79, then 129. Terah, 70, then 135. So here's the key insight. After the flood, age at begetting behaves like a lifespan. Remaining years behave like a lineage duration. In other words, the person lives 70 to 135 years. The house associated with their name persists longer. That's how ancient genealogies work. The centuries don't disappear, they change meaning. Terah, where genealogy stops. Notice something else. Terah is the last figure with a formal genealogical formula. After Terah, Genesis stops counting years this way and starts telling stories. That's not accidental. Genealogical timekeeping has done its job, and history begins. What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Quickly, because this gets abused. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not give us full genealogies for Genesis 5 or 11, but they do prove three things. Multiple numerical traditions existed. The Septuagint is ancient, not late. Numerical flexibility was tolerated. That's all we need them to do. The Septuagint stands on its own. So where does this leave us? Using the Septuagint alone, we see two chronological registers. Before the flood, ages are lunar reckoned. Lifespans are human. Numbers are structured, not mythic. After the flood, begetting age reflects lifespan. Remaining years reflect lineage memory. History accelerates. And at no point are we forced to believe that modern humans who have existed for 300,000 years suddenly live 10 times longer with no biological trace. Genesis never asks us to believe the impossible. It asks us to read ancient numbers the way ancient texts used them. So the final line, the patriarchs didn't need to live 900 solar years for their names to endure. They needed memory, and that's exactly what the numbers preserve. And so with that, I thought, this is a really cool exercise, and I even wrote a paper about it. I'll read you the abstract because, I've already kind of talked about it here. But the paper goes, a two-register chronological hypothesis in the Septuagint genealogies, lunar reckoning before the flood and functional lifespans after. The abstract reads, the extreme ages assigned to the patriarchs in Genesis 5 and 11 have long been treated either as literal biological claims or as mythological borrowing. Both approaches rest on the assumption that the numbers must function uniformly as solar year lifespans. This paper proposes a constraint alternative using the Septuagint, LXX, as a single internally coherent textual tradition. It argues that the Genesis preserves two chronological registers divided by the flood. One, pre-flood ages in Genesis 5 operate under lunar reckoning, applied consistently to begetting age, remaining years, and total age. And two, post-flood ages in Genesis 11 shift function, with the age at begetting reflecting a realistic human lifespan or maturity span, and the remaining years reflecting lineage or household duration. This model aligns with ancient genealogical practice, respects established biological limits for Homo sapiens, and explains why centuries persist in the text without requiring biologically impossible longevity. So, this was a fun exercise, and I feel like I don't know all of the answers, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, this paper that I've written and this formula that I've come up with to kind of solve this in my own mind is absolutely the to God honest truth. I don't know that. What I'm doing is I'm creating a hypothesis that is as close as what I can possibly get to calibrate things in my mind between science and the theology and Genesis. And so I appreciate you, if you've watched. I appreciate you hanging with me during this time. This is really fun, and I like recording these videos. I think I'm getting used to talking on camera, and I'm certainly excited. I'm going to keep doing this. Like I said, I'd like to go back and say, some things I'm pretty sure of. This one, I had a bunch of different ideas going around in my head, and I kind of, settled on something. But I really think when I'm not sure of something, I'll say, hey, you know what? This is a hypothesis. It's not necessarily a law. There's a difference between a hypothesis and a law. In science, we hypothesize, and then when it's peer reviewed and it's passed through peer review enough, we'll postulate that it's absolute truth. So I don't know that this is absolute truth. I'm hypothesizing, and it's fun to do, and I'm just hoping that one day, when heaven exists and I'm in it, I'm hoping that God will reveal this to me. But it's super fun to, work on those things in my mind. And hopefully, this helps some of you out there with questions that you might have had. I think the next thing that I'll probably talk about the differences in the various versions of the scripture, starting with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint and the Vulgate, the Masoretic, and potentially talk about the vorlage and what a vorlage is. The fact that we don't have any surviving Hebrew texts prior to the Septuagint. It's a very awesome thing. And so, with that, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.